much. Okay, so I just want to start off by clarifying the plan. Um, I want to ask you about the current plan now that we have this four-tiered colored system, how that compares to the original plan for returning to campus when we had a county watch list. Disregard PhD Plus right now. This is just for like the majority of students. When are
Sure.
we going to return? What that's going to look like?
Okay, great. Um, yeah, I actually just wrote an update. So it's going to go out to everyone tomorrow on this exact topic. Um, it's confusing, right? It's confusing because the entire reopening guideline documents that we've been working off of reference a watch list that in one day was removed. It doesn't exist anymore. So the state feels that they have um, simplified the metrics used. I think time will tell on that if it actually simplified or not. But the realities are we are in purple with 4.8 million students in the state of California living in counties that are in purple. So we are not alone. Uh, the good news is the list will be reevaluated on September 8th, so next Tuesday. We have information that suggests that we'll be off of the list on that day, so moved into the red category. If that's true, then that starts a list. It starts not a list, it starts a clock. So 14 days after you are out of purple, schools are authorized to be able to reopen. That is still a Board of Education decision. But hypothetically on September 22nd, we could have a green light to reopen schools. Now, our district had predetermined that we would not return until the end of the first quarter for secondary schools, which would be, well, the end of the quarter is October 9th, so it'd be October 12th. That Monday would be earliest possible return. It doesn't mean that we'll return on that date. It just means that that's the earliest possible date we will return. So there's still a lot of decisions to be made. But it does look like a path is being cleared for a return, maybe even sooner than we expected.
Is that October 12th going to stay in place even if we are in the red zone on September 22nd for 14 days?
Yes.
Also, the November 2nd date, which is kind of like if we're not in school by November 2nd, we're staying online. Is that date going to stay the same as well?
That date will stay in line, in place, but it is possible, and there are scenarios where we could be authorized to return prior to that date and choose not to. So it's not a guarantee, but if we are not in school by November, it is a guarantee that we will not come back until the end of the semester.
And then if we did go into school earlier, the plan was if we went back to in-person instruction, but we went back on the watch list, we would stay in class. Is that going to stay the same where if we returned in-person instruction, but go into the purple tier, we will stay in class for the rest of the semester?
So you are asking excellent questions. Yes,
Thank you.
the closing criteria remains the same. So in the past, once you came off of the watch list, which now is once you move into red, that even if the county moves back in, it becomes more of a local indicator. So they'll look at the same two criteria, but as it relates to Palo Alto. So it's possible that the county as a whole could move back into purple and we could remain open.
So in terms of closing, it's more of a city policy rather than a state policy. I mean, a county policy.
It is, yes, the county, okay, so let's back up. The California Public Health Department set the first guidelines, but it's dependent on a county, okay? But once we're open, then it becomes less dependent on the county and it becomes even more local and becomes dependent on the city and the schools.
Well, then why isn't it a city decision in the first place? Because if Palo Alto was in a red tier, I know it's meant for counties, but if
Yeah.
Palo Alto was in a red tier, but the Santa Clara County was in the purple tier, why wouldn't just Pali schools be authorized to return?
That's an excellent question. I think because they tried to put it in the hands of the 50 plus county public health departments, and they thought that if they gave away too much of that control, they would have so many exceptions to what they were trying to accomplish. The idea is that a county as a whole would have the best opportunity to flatten that curve. But your exact question has been part of the reason there have been challenges in part of the states, especially some of the rural, smaller districts have made your exact point that perhaps a giant county like San Bernardino or a San Diego County or Los Angeles County, which might have outliers that have nothing to do with what's happening in the city, are shut down because of what's happening in urban areas. In our case, it makes sense because you could also say, Santa Clara could be off of a list, San Mateo could be on, and the reality is San Mateo's across the street. So there's always going to be some arbitrary aspects to it. The good news is, though, that going back on the list of the county is not going to create a yo-yo in itself. It would really have to be locally impacted.
So going back onto the watch list, which is now going back onto the purple tier, would not have made us go to online classes if we had returned first semester. What kind of guideline would be in place for us to have to return to online classes if we went back to in-person instruction first semester?
Okay, you froze for just one little part of that. Can you ask me that question one more time?
Sorry. Yeah, just basically what guidelines are put in place for returning to online classes if in first semester we had gone to in-person instruction?
Okay, so you're asking what would lead to a closure locally?
Yeah.
It would be an increase in the positivity rates. Stand here one second. There are two criteria. Let's see if I can just pull it up here real quick. Here it is right here. New cases and positive test. So to go back into purple, it's more than 7 daily new cases per 100,000 residents. And for positive test, it's more than 8% of those testing positive.
Right, but going back in purple wouldn't make us close and turn to in-person.
It would do the same
classes.
thing. Okay, so then those same two criteria would apply, but only to Palo Alto.
Okay, so if Palo Alto specifically went into the purple tier, then we would have to close.
That's right.
Okay.
It'd be the same thing. So more than 7 per 100,000 Palo Alto residents versus, at that point, 7 out of every 100,000 county residents.
If we were to go back first semester and we stayed in-person instruction for the full first semester, would that be guaranteed that second semester starts in person?
Still dependent on the review week by week from the county of our local data. So as long as our local data doesn't go beyond those two criteria, then yes, we'd be good.
And then if we didn't go back at all first semester, would that policy look the same for returning second semester?
Yeah, so if let's say that we came off keep saying off the list. Let's say we came off, we went to red, but didn't actually come back, but we could have, okay? That still is the same as coming off. So as long as our local indicators aren't back in the purple, we can come back second semester, even if the county does go back to purple.
I kind of want to switch into PASD Plus now, which is basically we can go back, or small groups with a focus on special education students and students that are struggling can go back before the October 12th date.
Sure.
It's currently 14 students in a group with 2 adults. You are pushing for revision of that guideline for a 1-to-1 ratio.
Yes.
Historically, it's been 40 adults with 38 students. If you do not manage to revise the guidelines and achieve a 1-to-1 ratio of adults to students, are you still going to allow students onto campus on September 8th next week?
Yes. So those ratios work fine for PAUSD plus. There's not an issue there at all. They do not work for our moderate and severe special education students who need 1-to-1 aids. So PAUSD plus is going first anyway on September 8th. We're good. We're going. We're hoping for a September 14th return of special education services. And even today, I'm lobbying, working hard on trying to get these revised. And I'm lobbying other high-profile superintendents to join in this lobbying effort. I got some good movement today, and I'm optimistic we're going to get this thing fixed.
So special education students will not be going onto campus on September 8th, but on September 14th, you said?
That's right.
Okay. Now, this does have a focus on students that are struggling with online classes and special education. Do you see any other students, for example, students in lab classes or students that have hands-on classes, returning as part of this PAUSD plus before the October 12th date?
Not currently, because the rules are pretty strict about needing to maintain a consistent cohort of 14. So not rotating people through it. So for right now, there's not a path, but
Okay.
that can change.
So what will be gained by these students being on campus, especially the ones that are struggling? Because when I interview Mr. Klein, teachers won't be on campus. They'll still be doing their virtual classes. It's just they will be doing their virtual classes on campus. Students will be doing virtual classes on campus. So what is there to be gained from that?
Yeah, so for example, my chief technology officer and I went over this afternoon and visited some of the families that have PAUSD students that are living in RVs on El Camino Boulevard. So we went over and just met with them and talked to them and saw what they were dealing with. And you know, even a couple hotspots don't serve a whole family of 4 or 5 people competing in a very small space. For some people, just having a consistent place to go where they know they're going to have adults there that can help them, even if it's just helping log on and getting into the flow of a school day, and having a lunch delivered to them is really important. And we just can't forget that those conditions exist here in Palo Alto also. So, you know, in those cases, support may look different. You know, if you are if you're a student who has a lot of resources, okay, or a fair amount of resources, you might be struggling because you're not able to do an in-person lab. I totally understand that. I'm not minimizing that impact, but it's very different from a person that doesn't have a meal or internet access and everyone's living in one room. So we just, you know, we need to do one thing at a time, trying to support the people who need us the absolute most. And I get it, everybody wants and needs support, but prioritizing is important work. And that's work I take very seriously, and I know a lot of others do also. So that's why we're starting there. And we're starting with a small number of students because we want to get it right. So we're not starting with a small number of students and stopping. We want to start with a cohort or 2 at each of the secondary schools. And once we get it right, then we can expand. But we just want to make sure we don't misstep um, because we went too fast or didn't think through a detail.
So when you say starting small, this PAC Plus can expand to 25% of the school's population.
Yeah.
So you're not going to be at that 25% mark starting off.
Oh, no, not even close.
Do you have a rough estimate of like the percentage?
Each school's a little different. I don't think anybody's starting with more than 2 cohorts in the first couple days. So 14 to 28 students per site for the 5 secondary sites to get started. And then we'll see where it goes from there. The number will go up. We don't want to predetermine how fast it goes up. We want to see how well we can deliver with the smaller number first.
You said that information suggests that next week will be in the red tier. If we weren't and we were still in the purple tier, students would still be able to go onto campus as part of
Yes.
PAC Plus.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a carve out exemption that came in a separate order for those 2 categories.
And then is PAC Plus for elementary, middle, and high schools?
So we're not starting at the elementaries right now. We're waiting on them a little bit. So we're starting with just middle and high school.
But it is possible sometime in the future that elementary schools.
Yes.
Okay. While we're on that, what would reopening, not necessarily PAC Plus, but just reopening for everyone, look like differently between high schools, middle schools, and elementary schools?
Well, I think we're best positioned to reopen elementary. It's just easier. And it's easier because we've told families from the beginning that you'll have an option of going to online only if you choose, even when we come back. Elementary, if you're in 3rd or 4th grade, then you know what 3rd and 4th grade kind of looks like. So we can move a 3rd grade teacher either into online only or in person. If you're in high school, I mean, just if you think this through a little bit, put 10 high school students in a room together and ask them all what their schedules are, and you won't see 10 different schedules. You'll see combinations of 50, 60 different teachers, levels, classes. So it's exponentially more complicated because of the number of courses. Each course has 4 grade levels, and some courses have 2, 3, 4 levels within it. So it's just much harder to replicate online. So that transition's way trickier. So elementary's positioned to go first, but we'll see if we can make it work.
What about in terms of guidelines? What will look different between the 3 different schools?
Nothing.
Nothing. Okay. And what will those guidelines look like for students? Staff is very clearly laid out, so students.
So guidelines as far as what will help us to determine when we come back?
Just like guidelines that students will have to follow, because the district actually put out guidelines that staff are going to have to follow in terms of screening, testing, sanitization. So what guidelines will students have to follow?
Well, the easy answer to that is they'll have to follow the guidelines that are in place from the California Department of Health and Santa Clara County at the time we return. And the reality is those have already shifted so many times that the most accurate answer I can give you is we'll follow the guidelines that are in place on the days that we return, because it's just too early right now.
So it's really up to the county.
Absolutely.
In terms of what they'll have to follow.
Yes.
Okay. Will there be any sort of extra guidelines or accommodations put in place for staff members that are at a high risk, or students with family members, or students themselves that are at a high risk?
Well, if a student is at high risk, we would probably encourage them to work through the distance only option. Just makes sense. With our teachers, we have to work through parts of that. I mean, a lot of that is really kind of complicated human resources issues that we're involving our attorneys and the associations, and it's complicated, right? Because some people are at risk because of age factor. They're totally different scenarios, but we have to work through all of them. Here, it's a process called an interactive process. The interactive process means if you feel that you have a condition that keeps you from returning physically to work, you have to work through our human resources department. And it's actually a kind of a legal procedure that you walk through. We ask you a lot of questions, and you have to provide some, in some cases, doctors' recommendations. Then we see if we're able to accommodate you to not return physically. If we can, we do, and if we can't, then it has to go a different direction. But each case is different and is heard as a unique case.
And so you were mentioning the distance only option. Will that be an option for both the hybrid model and when we return fully in person, or just for the hybrid model?
So if you want to go distance learning, let's say we come back when we say, okay, our return is hybrid, which is what we had kind of planned going forward. You'll have the option of coming back hybrid or distance only. Those are your two options. And for elementary schools, 5% selected online only during the first round. If we actually say, okay, it's time to come back, that number may go up. We don't know what that number is. And we have no idea for the high schools.
Will there be some sort of, like this year, after the hybrid model, full 5 days a week in-person instruction?
Oh, we sure hope so, but it's hard to know right now. I mean, there's so many factors that will play into that will be beyond our control. I don't think that's a decision we're going to be in a position to weigh in on for a long time.
You may not be able to answer this, but if that were an option, would a distance only option still be available for the full in-person instruction?
This year, yes.
Okay. Next year?
Don't know. Yeah, what we don't know is how long lasting some of these things are going to impact schools, right? We just flat out don't know.
In one of the town hall meetings before school started, you basically said that if PAUSD goes back, a lot of counties in Santa Clara County are going back together.
Yeah.
Is that going to be the same thing in terms of like when sports start, or when we switch from a hybrid to a full in-person?
Yes. Yeah.
So working together. Is that, are there any like specific counties that will be with you with PAUSD, or will it just be, is it still up in the air? Will it be every single school county in Santa Clara County?
So each school district will have to make their own decision, and their school boards make some of these decisions. But I'm in a position with a pretty good network of superintendents that I collaborate with daily. And we're always calibrating and talking with each other. Even today, I was working with a big group on special education, PAUSD Plus, and their equivalents. Last night, I spent time with elementary superintendents talking about their return plans and why they chose or did not choose to look at the waiver options. Today, I was working with high schools about their thoughts about returning before the end of the semester. So we're doing some calibrating. I think it makes sense to check with school districts that you care about. For me, when it's elementary, I talk to Los Altos, and I talk to Wisman, and I talk to Cambrian, and a few others, but those are the ones that just jump right up front. When I look at high schools, I look at Fremont Union High School District, and then MVLA, so Mountain View, Los Altos, and then Los Gatos, Saratoga, and Santa Clara. And Santa Clara, I look for high schools and elementary. So there are groups within the big group. In Santa Clara, there's over 30 school districts. I talked to all of them, but more locally, those are the ones I really consult with the most.
What do you see as there to be gained from in-person classes as opposed to virtual classes?
Ah, geez, everything. I mean, yeah, I think beyond the academic learning, I think people are supposed to be around other people. And I'm really concerned about the long lasting impact of people not having human interaction. And, it's more important than just classrooms, right? I think people are supposed to go and be outside together. I think you're supposed to have dances. I think you're supposed to date. I think you're supposed to be able to sit down and have a sandwich with somebody and sit next to them and talk to them about things. I think you're supposed to be able to throw a ball to each other. I mean, so many of the basic things are off the table right now. I think if we're gone for too long, it's going to start to be weird to talk to somebody. And that's tragic. Yeah, I think that's more important than learning loss. Loss of interaction, I think, is I think it's going to be the most long-lasting impact of the closure.
And you see those benefits of social interaction and, of course, the benefits of learning, of being in person. Do those outweigh the risk of possibly thousands of students and faculty members getting coronavirus?
I don't think it's an apples and oranges thing, right? So I don't think it's fair, and I'm not putting words in your mouth. I don't think it's fair because there are people that would ask a question very similar to that. I don't think we get to paint it as people that want to come back despite the fact that people are going to get coronavirus. I don't see it that way. I see it as there are impacts that are occurring right now that are detrimental and hurting us that have nothing to do with a virus, with the exception of the virus shutting us down and putting us in this situation. Now, here's an example. Point to point, from March until now, divorce rates in the country are up 57%. Okay, that points to the stress that are on married couples, and we know that because they have to file a document declaring their divorce. Okay, at the same time, abuse reporting, child abuse reporting is down. Now, I don't believe for 1 second that abuse is down. I believe it's up. But the students who are getting abused are now at home with their abusers all day. And those reports aren't being filed because the same caring adults that would have been helping them aren't seeing them. So, I just don't subscribe to this idea that it's reckless to come back and it's going to cause imminent danger. I think we need to be smart about how we come back. And if it means that we come back in something less than what we're accustomed to, so something like a hybrid model, and maybe we don't do big assemblies and that stuff for a while, that's okay. I think just flat out boarding up the schools and putting locks outside isn't healthy or called for. And look around our town. I talk to the city manager every other week. If you walk down Cal Avenue or University, they're not boarded up. There's lots of people on the street, and I see students sitting together at restaurants. I see it. I see people walking together in the streets, and they've got masks and they're doing a decent job. But they're out there, and I just don't think it's sustainable to keep us locked up in the interest of safety when everywhere around us is showing that you can do some smart reopening. And I also get it. lots of people disagree with that opinion. But you asked me mine, so that's mine.
Yeah, it's a very valid opinion. I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
Yeah, for sure.
You have to be, and we have until 4:45, correct?
Fine. Yeah.
Well, it's 4:44. I can try to squeeze in one very last question.
Sure. It's fine.
If you can't answer, it's fine. And this is just the question I wanted to end on, which was, should students be optimistic for in-person classes? Should it be something they should look forward to?
Yes, but not in a rush. I think students at the secondary level have to have their mind wrapped around the possibility that they won't be back until January. Okay. Should they be optimistic about January and beyond? Yes. Is it they should be hopeful about earlier, optimistic about January? That's the most honest answer I've got for you.
Well, thank you very much. This has been very helpful. And